Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. This is your host, Adam Schrader, joined by my co-host, as always, Naresh Vissa. And we once again have Kelly Riggs on the line with us. We talked with Kelly last time about leadership, but today we're going to delve a little bit more into dealing with different generations at work. Kelly is the former two-time National Salesperson of the Year and has developed 2 corporate sales training programs in 2 different industries. He is the founder and president of Business LockerRoom. He co-hosts the bi-weekly video podcast and is the best-selling author of Counter Mentor Leadership: How to Unlock the Potential of the 4-Generation Workplace. Now, one of the things you were talking about before is when you were talking about, leading by Zoom and doing all of that. Do you think it puts millennials in us snowflake millennials, does that put us in a better position to be leaders because we're more comfortable with the technology and communicating with people that way, as opposed to the baby boomers or the other generations? Like, does working from home and working remotely put us in a better position because of the fact that we have more of the people skills remotely than some of the older generations might?
Well, see, I wouldn't agree with your premise. I don't think that millennials, generally speaking, have better people skills per se. I think.
Oh, I'm just talking about we're used to dealing with people online more.
Yeah, I would say no, and I'll tell you why. I don't think it gives you any additional opportunity because of that. I think it would give you additional opportunities because you have more familiarity and more capabilities oftentimes than boomers with technology. And so boomer boss may say, hey, can you help us set up Zoom and all that? And you become more visible and more, front and center. But it's interesting, the ton of research out there with regards to millennials and social media. I mean, they're great at carrying on multiple conversations on multiple platforms, whether it's, Snapchat or TikTok or Zoom or whatever it may be. They've got everything going out there, but they're typically isolated. I like to say they're the most socially connected generation in the history of the world, but the most socially isolated as well, because they're doing this from the privacy of their home or bedroom, Starbucks, back patio, whatever it may be. They can really connect. But when you're talking about Zoom, typically you're talking about face-to-face and you're talking about interacting directly with other people. So now you've got all the system dynamics of a community that come into play, not just through the interaction on leaving messages, but actually interacting with other people. So you've got a lot of issues that come into play because you're visible and you've got to communicate and you've got to interact. And it's unfortunately, a lot of times you have to interact with older people too, who don't have the appreciation for your ability to abbreviate everything.
Well, talking about that Harvard study, I guess, and you said the 12% and managing people, being a people person. I definitely, now that I think about it, if I would have had more time to think about your question, I think I would have said somewhere along the lines of 10 to 15%. But that's because in this kind of new abnormal that we're living in, and I've been living in this abnormal for the last 7 years because I've had a work from home business since 2013. I've been working from home since 2008. And I consider myself to be a people person, but I have always said results are what matter. The work is what matters. And being disconnected, not having corporate offices, not going in, dressing up, seeing people every day, you get to get rid of all the fat and focus on what's most important. And
Sure.
So it doesn't surprise me that results are still what matters. And I think that's only going to accelerate as we move forward in the work from home economy, as more millennials are working, not just millennials, but everyone's now kind of forced to work from home, and millennials are leading the way because we grew up with the internet. We grew up with, like you said, Snapchat, and now TikTok. Not grew up, but we were kind of early adopters in those.
Absolutely.
And so the point that I want to make is I think moving forward, the idea of being a people manager or people person, on a scale of 1 to 100, maybe you had to be like a 60 or a 70 previously. But my prediction is that that number is going to dwindle and get lower, and it's going to be more about, can you get the job done? Because now you're at home with your family, or if you're single, you're at home single, and all that matters is, are we on task with the project? Are we doing a good job with our work?
Well, listen, I don't want to mislead anyone. The fact of the matter is that as a manager, and I use the terms interchangeably, and we could have that discussion sometimes. But I mean, if you have people working for you, and your title is manager, if you have people working for you, you're a leader, whether you like it or not. The only question is, are you any good at it, right? So, but not to mislead people, because leaders get paid to do one thing and one thing only: get results, period. And if anybody thinks that's not true, try not getting results and see how long you get to keep your job as a manager. The question is, how do you do it? Right? So the micromanager says, I will do it by sheer force of will, and because I'm very good at what I do and I know all the answers and I know how to fix it. And that's typically true, but they don't develop a team around them, and they don't multiply their capabilities. The effective leader says, oh, I still am paid to get results, but I'm doing it through a team of people by developing and exploiting their potential and allowing them to grow and so forth and so on. So all I've done in taking you, say if you worked for me, you used to work in the office 2 doors down from me as one of my key direct reports. Now you're working from home. It really doesn't change anything other than the way we communicate, perhaps the frequency we communicate. And I expected you to get things done when you were 2 doors down in the next, the office down the hall. I still expect you to get things done here. But all the same problems that exist in the workplace are still there, and then some. So while I do agree with you, it is much more now visible about whether or not you get things done. The fact is, we still have to communicate. You still have to feel valued in the workplace. You still want to be appreciated for the work that you do. You want to have the opportunity to grow and develop and get promoted and all of those things. And as a leader, if I don't have those things on my radar, eventually you're either going to start your own business or you're going to go to work for the competition.
Well, you said, try getting a job and not producing or not showing results and see how long you have that job. Just curious to hear your thoughts, since you wrote a book with your son. I guess your son is also a business partner in the company. When it comes to nepotism, because this is something we've all kind of dealt with, where, the boss's son is kind of in line to take over as CEO, or there's just a long history of nepotism or cronyism in various corporations, even in our politics and government.
Sure.
Does that same principle apply to nepotism, or does a family member or a father kind of reach a point and say, hey, you know what, son, you're just not cut out for this?
Well, technically, and I'm going to answer your question because it's a good one. Technically, earlier I was saying, if you're a leader and you don't believe that getting things done is what you get paid to do, try not getting results as a leader. But you ask a good question. I have worked personally. My son has his own consulting shop, so he's very successful in his own right. We work together with a base of clients that have come to us through working together to write the book. So we do have a company together. But I have worked personally in my work with the Business LockerRoom with a lot of family-owned businesses. And I'm telling you, that's not a formula that's been solved anywhere. I mean, it is extraordinarily rare to see really vibrant, healthy, emotionally mature, family-owned businesses. If you're listening, don't get me wrong. I know they exist, but it's pretty rare. I've seen way more dysfunctional family businesses than I've ever seen those that really flourish and do well, for the reasons you look at. I mean, people, you've got to hire talent. You got to hire really effective people and bring them in. And when they find out that the pathway up is pretty much blocked, it creates, some issues, and eventually you're going to lose some key people. But the interpersonal dynamics of working with your family creates just a myriad of problems. And it takes an incredibly emotionally mature group of people to be able to have conflict without blowing things up in the family, to be able to, deal with conflicting ideas and to deal with different ways of doing things. And imagine you've got two people in a family that both have high driver personalities and they both think they're right all the time, which is very common, by the way. They can get into some pretty serious conflict. It creates a problem. Cronyism is maybe a second cousin of what we're talking about, but it's another problem as well. I've got a particular client that I've worked with for years, and in one of their departments, they hired a new director for that particular department, and he brought in 3 people of his own from a previous job, and it blew up the entire department. They considered that to be cronyism. And it showed a little bit of lack of foresight by the director from a leadership perspective. What is going to happen when I introduce all these new personalities and they're all my hand-picked people and we all have great relationships and we all know the inside jokes together and they don't? He never gave that any real serious consideration. And I can't say that I blame him per se. He's just trying to bring talent into the company. But it created some serious problems. And I don't think these things go away. Again, this is kind of a case-by-case basis, but it's rare to find a family-owned business that can flourish.
As you go along, there's always been, multiple generations in a workplace, and we've always had to deal with that. However, as technology has continued progressing, it's gotten to the point where there's an even wider gap between the oldest generation and the youngest generation than there's ever been before. And, 10 years from now, that gap will be even wider, and it'll just continue to get wider and wider as technology increases in pace. How do you even start dealing with those gaps, especially whenever you're going to have the virtual distance, so your older generation isn't going to be physically interacting with the younger generation and getting, the hands-on help that they could get in some situations? How do you go about even starting to manage multiple generations from a distance?
Well, it's a real problem. I do want to give you some good news, however. According to some sources, baby boomers are retiring at a rate of about 10,000 a day. So there's some good news when you talk about those who are challenged with technology issues going away. That's really not the answer you want to hear, though. I think that when you look at leadership, and if you're a Gen Xer, you're kind of in the middle. They're the great forgotten generation. Millennials have become the most research talked about. My son likes to say maligned generation in the history of the world. Gen Z's right behind them. They're the digital natives. They've always, they came out of the womb tweeting about the experience. So they've been around a while with regards to technology.
Yeah.
But Gen
Doctor
X is
had
kind
cold
of
hands, 3 stars.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is more ultimately probably about Gen X, especially older Gen X, because they still got a lot of time in the workplace. Younger baby boomers like myself, baby boomers are supposed to go to about 1964. I was born in 60, but I'm almost 60 years old now. So you're seeing the baby boomers fall away fairly rapidly. That's a real problem for business, by the way, because of the knowledge drain. If we don't replace it or if we don't capture that knowledge on the way out the door, it means we got to reinvent the wheel a lot of times. But what you'll find with great leadership, guys, it's really critically important, is that leadership of any age, in any group you want to put leaders in, one of the most significant skills that they have to have is adaptability. The boomer leader who has adapted, and I would say I'm one of those, who has adapted to technology, embraced it, who's not guilty of that age-old bad saying of, well, that's the way we've always done it around here. If you can find leaders who are willing to change and adapt, then they can lead during the current pandemic crisis, where you have to begin to lead in a remote fashion. Those who do not have the capacity to adapt, they're the ones that are going to struggle. And sadly, it's the people that work for them that are going to pay the price. I like to use, from a sports perspective, I like to use the analogy of Coach Krzyzewski, Coach K at Duke. He's been coaching now for, almost 35, 40 years at Duke.
Over 40 years.
Yeah, and he continues to win year after year after year. And you think about the game of basketball, it's changed dramatically in 30 years. We, used to not have a time clock, a shot clock. We used to not have a three-point line. We used to have really short shorts instead of those long ones, and it was kind of gross. But anyway, there, a lot of things about the game has changed. And on top of that, his players are all of these millennials and now Gen Z kids that we talk about but he just keeps winning. The more you research a guy like that, the more you see that what makes him successful is that he's changed his ways dramatically over, 4 decades. People who can do that, who have the temperament for it, can be effective as leaders, regardless of the generational issues. Those who can't, those who get stuck in my way or the highway, this is the only way to do it, and this is the way we've always done it. That's a disaster.
Yeah, really good point with Coach K, because college basketball has changed so much, like you said, over 4 decades. And you got this one and done rule where players are just coming in for 1 year,
Exactly.
going out 1 year. So the way that he recruits, so college basketball is very different from the NBA, because in college, it's about the people skills on top of the results or the knowledge of the game. You have to go out and you have to recruit, and a lot of these kids, you have to go out and recruit from the inner cities. And so the way that Coach K has, I know this because I went to Duke, or I have a degree from Duke, and the way that he recruits is very different today than what it was 30 years ago, 20 years ago. The type of player that he recruits today, very different from what it was, like you said, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So
Sure.
I think that's an excellent analogy that you can make. But talking about the baby boomers, Gen Y, Gen Z, how we can all work together, do you think moving forward as things continue to get digitized, working from home becomes the norm, are baby boomers, the older generation, would you say that they're doomed under this new business environment? Or what are your tips for how they can adapt, which K has?
Well, I don't think they're doomed, but I definitely think they're endangered. They're going to hit the endangered species list for sure. Again, it goes back to this idea that you simply have to be willing to adapt the tools. Leadership principles are timeless. Leadership principles don't change. What was it made you an effective leader 2 centuries ago? 2 centuries ago, would make you an effective leader today. But what does change is means and methods and modes of communication and technology and every other thing. So I think if you lack the ability to assimilate new information, absorb new information and new ideas and new ways of doing things, I think definitely you have a problem.
Yeah. Now, as far as the common issues that there are under, what would you say are the biggest problems when it comes to generational conflict?
You mean in terms of the group of people?
Yeah. So I guess you wrote a book, How to Unlock the Potential of the 4th-Generation Workplace. So what are some common issues that you see when it comes to, let's say, the baby boomer getting into a fight with a millennial, or a millennial getting into a fight with a Gen Z? What are kind of the differences?
Well, I'm going to win a bunch of friends on the millennial side of things, and I'm probably going to irritate some of my boomer cohorts out there. But the problem, it's always a leadership problem. And by the way, I don't care if you're a millennial leader, which obviously there's a bunch of those in the workplace. Now, as millennials have become the largest segment of the workplace, there's obviously more and more millennial leaders. It's a leadership problem, period, cut and dried. But the real issue is that boomers confronted with something quite different than they're used to. They like to say, hey, young man, I've been here 20 years and I've done everything you can imagine and I'm successful. So don't come in here with your fancy technology and tell me, blah, blah, blah. Right? Well, that's ignorance at its finest. At the same time, to put an entire generation in a single bucket and say those millennials are fill in the blank. True story. We had a client we worked with down in Texas, large engineering group, led by a female CEO, one of the smartest ladies I've ever known, absolutely brilliant. And she kept telling us that she was having problems with those. She said, she didn't say millennials. She goes, those millenniums. I'm having all these millenniums. They don't do this, and these millenniums, they got this problem. And I said, excuse me, they're millennials. And she said, yeah, whatever. She had 3 bad experiences. So she got on a rant during one of our training sessions, and I finally stopped her and I said, let me ask you a question. Would you be comfortable substituting the word female for millennials? She said, what do you mean? I said, well, you keep talking about millennials as this homogeneous group of people. You put them all in one box. I thought that was something we weren't supposed to do. Would you just say that about all females or all Hispanics or blacks or, and she just, her eyes got really big and she realized what she was doing. I said, you simply cannot put an entire generation of people into one box because of the actions of a few. And so that becomes the challenge for the boomer leader, is they see someone who they decide is lazy or entitled or makes excuses or whatever. And then they say, yeah, these kids these days, right? That's typical boomer talk. On the other hand, millennials come into the organization, they go, oh, these old people, they don't get it. They don't have that. That's where the conflict is that one of the principles of the book that we wrote is that you have to understand each other's perspective. But let's not make any bones about this. That responsibility lies first with the leader. So one of the things that we train people to do is that when you've got new people coming into the workplace, the first thing you want to do is sit down, understand each other's perspectives, and determine some very clear expectations, create clarity for our relationship and where we're going from here. If you don't do that and you retreat to your own corner and come out and fight in the middle of the ring for 3 minutes every day or once a week or whatever, then that's the kind of relationship you're going to have, and it's non-productive. So a leader's responsible for setting the pace for the company, and if someone comes in and they don't want to comply or comport to the expectations that I set, that's okay. They'll find another opportunity, but at least we'll avoid that conflict. And again, I can hear somebody saying, well, yeah, but the boomer who comes in and says, you're going to do it my way, and these are my expectations. Now, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a genuinely emotionally intelligent boomer leader who says, I don't know everything about technology. These younger kids have things to teach me. That's where the word counter came from. Mentoring is usually one-sided. Counter mentoring means I'm going to grow you, but you can grow me at the same time. And I have to have the willingness to listen and to accept ideas and perspectives that may be different than mine. If you can do that as a leader, all this generational nonsense goes away pretty quickly.
Yeah, I wish more people in life would take that tack. But if you go on social media these days, forget about it. How have you, a baby boomer, and your son, as we've said, snowflake millennial, how have you guys found a good synergy of writing your book together, working together, and what advice do you have to kind of all the father-son duos out there and also the millennial baby boomer duos out there?
That's a really good question. I would say it was about as easy as it can be for my son and I, but that didn't mean it didn't have some of its challenges. And I'll tell you why. As the dad, you kind of want to be the alpha. You kind of want your son to look up to you. You kind of want your son to come to you for answers and all that. As the son, you want your dad to be proud of you. You want him to recognize that, you're becoming a man and a successful individual, a leader in your own right. And so those things kind of clash a little bit. I'll never forget my son interned with me, the company, when he was in college. He got out on his own. And when he got out on his own, he'd come home or he'd call and he'd say, hey, Dad, I'm having this problem and I'm struggling here. He's looking for my advice. And, that's kind of when I puffed up my chest and said, yeah, I'm a great dad and all that kind of thing. But there came a point in time, and this is where it got really interesting for us, is I would begin to ask him questions. I would say, hey, son, I ran into this scenario with some questions about millennials today, and here's the conversation we had, and here's how I answered it. What's your take on that? And we began to develop sort of this counter-mentoring sort of relationship that became the model for the book that we wrote. I think you have to reach a point of being very comfortable in your own skin with your value and being more concerned about the welfare of the other person. So I again, as the leader, because I'm the parent, I become more of the leader, even though we may be equals today from a business standpoint as a parental leader. More of that responsibility lies on me than it does him, because no matter how old I am or he is, he'll always be my son, and I'll always care about helping him, navigate life. He certainly does a phenomenal job in and of himself, all by himself. He's great at it. But occasionally he'll come and ask my, input on things. But equally, I ask him his input all the time. When we finally decided to work together, and this is where I think the magic happened for us, he had the courage, and I think that's because of the way he was raised, and mostly because of his mom, who's a pretty spectacular woman. He said, "Dad, I really want to do this. I want to work together, but I would like to, as you kind of teach, I'd like to set some ground rules and have some clarity and expectations." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Dad, I don't want to just work for you. I want to be your partner. I want to be a co-owner and work together equally. I don't want to labor in your shadows and sort of be an underling and all of those kinds of things, not because of you, but because of me, and because I want to begin to develop my own sort of legacy brand and, all those kinds of things." And I said, "Absolutely. I got no problem with that whatsoever. I'll, always at this age now, you're very highly successful. I'll treat you as an equal, and, we'll always have our father-son relationship. But at this level, you and I are going to be equal business partners, and you have my promise to act in a way that's consistent with that." And he agreed to do the same. And I think when you set those ground rules, if there is any conflict in the future, we can come back and say, "Hey, remember, these are the things we talked about. Where did we kind of run off the rails here? Because we already agreed this is the kind of people we want to be." And without that sort of understanding and connection, conflict just becomes self-preservation. You just defend your own ideas and your own perceptions.
Excellent. Well, Kelly Riggs, former 2-time National Salesperson of the Year, author with his son, co-author of the book Counter Mentor Leadership: How to Unlock the Potential of the 4-Generation Workplace. He's also the co-founder of Counter Mentors and the founder and president of Business LockerRoom. Websites: countermentors.com. That's countermentors.com. Also bizlockerroom.com. bizlockerroom. There are 2 R's in between locker and room. bizlockerroom.com. Kelly, any final thoughts that you want to share?
No, guys, what a great experience. You asked phenomenal questions, really insightful. And I suspect that the people who listen to your podcast get really great content weekly. Thank you for letting me be a part of it.
No, thank you for coming on. And you came on for 2 episodes. So really, really appreciate that. It's been extremely, extremely worthwhile. So again, check them out, countermentors.com, bizlockerroom.com. Go on Amazon, type in Kelly Riggs. You'll see all of his previous books. Just really, really great information on workplace culture, on millennials, Gen Z, kind of the generational differences in the workforce, and of course on leadership over the past 2 episodes. So Kelly Riggs, thanks once again, and to all our listeners out there, until next time, keep on working from home.